Are you recording?
Yeah, recording.
Lovely.
Good evening, everybody. We're just letting all of our colleagues in. We've over 150 people who are just joining us. So just give us a second. We'll let them all in and then we'll start our presentation. Okay, 5, 4, 3. And admit all. Fantastic. So good evening. It is lovely to see you all. And thank you to those who have your cameras on. It's really, really nice to be able to see you. You can see your colleagues by, I see loads of waves. Hi, how are you? You can see by just scrolling through, and some of you have your cameras on, some of you don't. If you have your cameras on, it's great to be able to see each other. There's a sense of community about it. But some of you won't be either comfortable, either don't have a camera, or you might have an unstable connection. So don't worry about it if that's the case. So good evening. My name is Katrina Bradley. I'm going to share my screen with you just now, and I think I'm going to probably end up sharing with you on the very last slide, which is no good to us at all. So we'll start on the first slide. So presentation view, and we'll go to the start. So this evening's webinar is about leading teams through COVID-19. And we have come up with this one as a result of your own feedback. We're aware last week's was on infection prevention and control, and people found it very, very useful. There was a lot of very good feedback, and some of the queries that came up were about how do you engage with your teams when you are going through this sort of phase. And so this evening we've concentrated on leading our teams through COVID-19. So the very usual, we're going to go through this quite quickly because it's becoming very familiar with us all. Keep your microphones muted, please. Videos on and off as you wish. If there's any difficulty with sound, just let us know through the chat box. But generally, you know, if you log on and log off again to Zoom, it's fine. You can use the comments box for any comments or questions, and this is being recorded because we make it available to our colleagues who can't join us this evening. And we may use some of the information from the webinar, so just let me give you a little bit of context on that. I'm part of a group with many of my colleagues across HSE, Department of Health, PSI, IPU, and we meet every Wednesday morning as part of the Pharmacy Contingency Planning Group, and in that I share with them some of the things that come through on the comments and come through from yourselves. So it's a very direct link to the policymakers on where the sentiment of the profession is. So just to let you know, that happens. Our format for this evening is we're going to have a presentation and some conversation. This evening it's a non-clinical topic. We try to alternate clinical and non-clinical. The discussion can happen via the chat box and we will be finished by 9. So the three things we've heard very loudly and clearly from our colleagues is that A, you like that we finish within the hour, B, you like to have interaction, and C, you like to have some conversation with the panels or with the co-hosts. So we're going to follow that format again this evening. We heard your feedback loud and clear from last week that perhaps we spent a little bit too long in the introduction of the evening. And so I'm talking a bit faster and I'm going to speed it up a little bit because we want to move over to the main event of the evening, which is our own Katrina Campbell. So I'm going to introduce Katrina here. You can read the information on the screen there about all of her accomplishments and her expertise and her experience. Just to share with you from my perspective, Katrina is, I would consider her a dear friend at this stage. I've known her for many years since I joined RCSI. I know her from coaching circles. I've been on development programs with her. I've always found her to be so kind-hearted, so insightful, and very astute about what people need. She's coached many of the staff in the Institute of Pharmacy, and so I feel really, really privileged and honoured to have her here with us this evening, and I think you'll agree with me at the end of the evening that she has some real gems of wisdom to share with us. Of course, you can contact us and contact Katrina afterwards, and you will get the slides of this evening, so you'll be able to see all this information, even if I don't go through it in particular. Now, as always, we just want to get a sense of who's in the room. So I'm going to ask you through a poll that I'm putting up on your screens right now, who do we have in the room with us this evening? What is your area of practice? For people who are looking at this retrospectively on the recording, you're not going to see the poll, but I will share with you verbally what the outputs are. But we have 190 people with us this evening, and so we're just going to give a minute to people to select which area of practice they have, be it community, hospital, academia, industry, regulatory, administrative, non-pharmacist. And we've also, you'll notice an improvement on last week, put in the 5th year pharmacy students who are doing their appel placements, because we know we have some of them, and last week was the first time we opened up our webinars to them. We also know that we have some people now who aren't pharmacists who are joining us. They've heard of us through Twitter, and people internationally who want to join in, and we're delighted to have them, so welcome everybody. Okay, so 150 of you have polled, so I'm just going to share the results of that with you. As usual, the majority, 77% of our colleagues this evening are from community pharmacy, so welcome to all of you. I'm sure you've had a long, hard day, and I am really pleased that you've chosen to come here instead of out there in the sunshine this evening, so thank you. And for any of you who feel like bringing your iPhone outside and having a glass of wine while you listen to this, go ahead, you deserve it after the day you've had. Our hospital colleagues, likewise, you're very, very welcome, 11 of you. Those in academia, I'm sure again, you're having a tough old time correcting exams and also preparing for the year ahead, so welcome to you. Our colleagues in industry, regulatory affairs and administration, you're very, very welcome. This evening, for the first time, we don't have any non-pharmacists, so that's fine. Welcome to our pharmacy students, and then the others, we don't know who you are, but you're equally welcome this evening. So that's who we have with us. I'm going to stop sharing those results, and I'm going to do our usual. So we always ask at the beginning if you can let us know how you're feeling. Just one word, go to menti.com and you put in the code that's on the screen there, please. And if you could start doing that, you should see, can you see my screen there as it's the word cloud is starting to come, Alicia?
I can't see your screen.
Nope.
No, we're
okay,
still just seeing the code.
Right, fair enough. So I will go to the Menti screen. And this is a kind of, there's a couple of reasons why we do this. One of the main reason is to see how you're feeling. I don't know about you, but often we can go through our day and nobody asks, how are you? It's also to see how are we doing in terms of evolving. So the very first week we had a lot of tired, disillusioned, stressed, overwhelmed. Last week was nice. Last week it was still tired. Tired was by far the biggest that we had, but actually we had a little bit more optimistic, a little bit more happy, a little bit more relaxed. The people who were relaxed this evening were quick off the mark, because relaxed actually came up really quickly as the #1 emotion. But I do see very, very quickly tired has come in as well. And it's probably because you're tireder. It's come a little bit later because it's hard to have the energy for these sorts of things sometimes. So I know some people feel this might be a little bit of a waste of time. It's actually a very important gauge for a couple of reasons. It's an inaccurate science and an inexact science, but what we are doing here is we're just getting a sense check for the profession. So 67 of you have input your word, and just like the previous 2 weeks, tired is at the beginning, at the middle. Now, I had an interesting conversation today with some of our colleagues in the HSE, because tired, it can actually be a word that we use when we feel what we think is tired, but actually sometimes we can feel something different. Feelings can be a little bit tough to kind of really pinpoint sometimes. So tired could be feeling undervalued, or it could be other things. So we're actually, in 2 weeks' time, we're going to look at mental health and understanding the impact of COVID and trying to understand a little bit and get in touch with our feelings. But look, I'm going to stop it there, because what we can see is tired and anxious are still predominant feelings. But what I'm really, really heartened to see is content and happy, relaxed, resilient starting to come through. And that could be just the good weather. It could be that you've looked at your 3 positives, because Mary reminded us to do that in the first week. It could be that you've just seen a bit of a change. It could be that we've relaxed the we've seen a relaxation in the social restrictions. So I don't know what's behind these, but thank you very much for sharing them. And I really appreciate your honesty. And that will keep going if you want to add in your words for another moment or two. Okay, so I think that's nearly the end of, oh golly gosh, that's not what I was looking for. It's very funny, I was saying to some of the colleagues beforehand, some of the feedback that you give, it's really good in knowing how well we're doing. But what some of you have said, and I really appreciate your feedback, is we like that it's not too professional, that sometimes you make mistakes and it all looks a bit more, you know, kind of, let's see, share. That keeps sharing the same screen for me. Why is that? I don't think I actually had anything else really, to be honest. So I think I'm going to pass over to you, Katrina, to start the evening, because what we have now is how do we lead our teams, particularly when we don't feel terribly resilient ourselves, perhaps, or as we're evolving and trying to adapt. So it is my very great pleasure to introduce Katrina. Katrina, it's so long since I've wanted to work with you. This is kind of the first foray into it. So thank you very, very much for joining us this evening. And I am going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Katrina, and thank you for your kind words. Lovely to hear. And, you know, well done to you and all of the team. This is a fantastic support and resource for people in the pharmacy profession. I think it's really admirable. And thank you to everybody who's on the call this evening. I'm really pleased that you chose to spend an hour with us rather than out in the sunshine. I know that it's a tough choice. But, you know, it's a difficult time for people leaders, and I know what we've tried to focus on tonight are just a few insights and tips that will hopefully help you make a bit more sense of what's been going on, both for yourself and for the people on your teams, and hopefully some takeaways that you can take and implement. So in preparation for tonight, we asked 3 questions to try and get some insight into what do we focus on. So this is a huge area: leading your teams, leadership, team dynamics, all that stuff. And what I wanted to do was make sure that it's as relevant as possible to the lived experience that you've been having in the last couple of months. So we asked 3 questions. One was around the main challenges you've had as a people leader in the last couple of months. The second one was around whether you've been surprised by any of the behaviours you've seen on your teams, and that could have been positive or negative, and in fact both examples came back in. And the final one then was around what would make the biggest difference to your team's performance. So thank you to everybody who gave us some feedback on that. It's been really helpful in terms of determining what to focus on for the time that we have together this evening. And so the first thing that we're going to look at is around, you know, when a team is working well together, when it's a high performing team, so outside of everything that's going on at the moment, but just a strong performing team, what does that look like, and what are the kind of positive domains that a team should have? And the model I have up on the screen there, I think, just helps to structure our thinking a bit. So it's from a chap called Patrick Lencioni. He has a text called The 5 Dysfunctions of Teams, but I prefer to think of it on the flip side around what are the things that actually make a team perform particularly well. So unsurprisingly, the foundation on which this pyramid is built is around trust. Trust is very much the glue that holds a team together, and it's the foundation from which high performance is built. So at the very basic level, trusting one another. If you move up a level in the pyramid there, engage in unfiltered conflict around ideas and plans. And I know this sometimes is surprising for people, because I think people sometimes associate conflict with being a bad thing. If there's conflict in our team, and it's something that a number of you mentioned, that's not good. But actually, this model should challenge your thinking on that a bit. In a way, a team needs to have conflict. People need to feel heard. They need to have an opportunity to disagree, to speak up, to bounce things around, to debate whether an idea or a way of working makes sense for them as a team. And I would worry more if we saw a team with no conflict. It's something Lencioni calls artificial harmony. Couldn't think of it there. Artificial harmony. So a team might look fine on the surface, but in fact, there's always going to be, you know, back channels happening. You know, 1 or 2 people who may not agree with a particular course of action or how something is getting done. And what you want is to get that out in the open and discussed amongst the team. So a degree of conflict, particularly around ideas and plans and ways of working, is something that you're looking for in a strong team. Moving up a level from that again, so it's around commitment. So commitment to decisions and plans of action. So once your team has had a chance to really debate and have a robust discussion around ways of working and plans of action, they're much more likely to come together to be committed to their goals and objectives. And then again, moving on from that, once everyone's clear on their goals and objectives, they're much more likely to feel personally accountable and mutually accountable for what they're there to deliver. So clarity on your goals, leading on then to clarity around your roles and responsibilities. And what you're really looking for in a strong team is peer-to-peer accountability. So accountability doesn't always have to be up the chain. So you want your teams to feel accountable to each other for success as much as they feel accountable to you. And in a strong performing team at the top of that pyramid, that's where you get the collective results. So where you've got the trust as the absolute foundation, you've given people a chance to discuss and debate and bring everybody's opinions into the room, then teams are much more likely to come together around what are we collectively here to do and hold themselves accountable. And I just put in a little quote there. I'll see if I can move my pictures here to, see it a little better. So this is from a professor of work and organisational psychology in the UK who works predominantly in the NHS and with the NHS in terms of understanding leadership there, Michael West. And he says there's overwhelming evidence now that high performing teams where staff are valued, they feel respected, engaged and supported, leads to better patient outcomes and decreased mortality, which is really quite staggering. And it's been a huge driver in terms of investment in leadership development in the NHS in particular, because they're able to prove a very strong correlation between a team that's working with a patient and what the outcomes for that patient's health and ultimately mortality are like, which is pretty staggering actually. So Katrina, I know we had spoken about this in advance, and the conflict piece in particular was something that we had discussed, and it had struck me in terms of the feedback that we got from the group that people are worried about conflict, that they would prefer if they could eliminate the conflict within their teams. So I hope this model in some way goes to reassure you that there's always space for conflict. There needs to be some, and as a leader, part of what you're trying to do is do that in a contained way and give people a chance to debate and discuss and get things off their chest and be heard.
Yeah, I think Katrina, it sounds very funny going Katrina, but yeah, we're both called Katrina, so what can we do? I think Katrina, yeah, it's one that I find I use this with all teams I've ever worked with. So anybody who's ever worked with me will see this and know it. Trust is paramount. You need to trust each other and know everybody has their back. The conflict bit is the one I find more difficult. And I suppose the way Lencioni positions it, and he calls it the 5 dysfunctions of a team, so that the dysfunction here is a lack of conflict. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have open conflict and warfare, but I suppose what he says is you need to be able to have dissenting views and space for argument and discourse about that. And I would agree with you, Katrina, when you have people just nodding and saying yes, and this really kind of lovely, placid, happy environment, it's fine, but it's not conducive to a highly performing team. And where you have conflict, if you've got a leader who understands the value of that, I think you're in a really good place. But one thing I did notice, Katrina, coming through in some of the questions is, how do you deal with conflict in the workplace? So now this, I think, is different to healthy conflict, where everybody understands that there is a room for debate and there's a room for a challenge in a healthy way. I think if people don't understand that, what can happen is that the conflict manifests in a negative way. And so how do you handle that? If you haven't had the opportunity to build up this type of a structure, what do you do around conflict that isn't healthy?
Yeah. And that is going to occur because, workplaces are made up of people and people clash sometimes, and that's okay. But we as leaders need to make sure that it doesn't become a toxic or a negative influence for the team. And I think, look, conflict it's a broad topic. It's probably one you could run an entire webinar on. But, just in terms of some guiding principles, I would say try to get underneath the bonnet with what the conflict is about. Separate the problem from the person. I think what you really need to try and do is listen for the need underneath what the conflict appears to be on the surface, because often people clash and it's not about what it appears to be. It's about something much more fundamental to them, like whether they feel disrespected, do they feel unappreciated, do they feel that they're not heard. it's those things, like Alicia, you've given me a good example at one stage around rostering, and you've said, look, I need that Saturday off, I need to go to a wedding, the roster comes in, you're on the roster, and suddenly you've got some conflict. The intent, of whoever was doing that roster was not to create conflict, it was just to make sure that you had the coverage that you needed on the floor. But from the person's perspective, the message could be interpreted as, you're not important enough, to me, in terms of remembering what you asked for or honouring your request for that time. And it becomes a conflict around something much deeper, around feeling disrespected. So I would say, trying to ask good open questions to get underneath the bonnet around what's going on is really useful. And then I suppose in terms of what you need to be seen to do with the rest of the team, because as always, people are always looking at how you handle things as a leader. The rest of the team are always going to be very aware of what's happening. If there's a couple of people that are clashing, or if an individual is clashing with you. And I think, what you really need to do there is be as transparent as you can in terms of how fairly you're seen to be dealing with a conflict, using objective criteria in terms of how you're handling an issue. And your job is really to try and generate as many options to solve what the issue is as possible, rather than that kind of either or thinking, so that there's one right or wrong solution. Conflict, generally gets resolved with compromise. And what you can do as a leader through asking good questions is try to figure out what might be acceptable in terms of compromises.
Okay, yeah, that's good. It's kind of balancing both, isn't it? It's trying to nurture that area of healthy conflict, and then really having the courage to face into some of the more messy conflict. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's just staying attuned to what's the tipping point. So yes, some of it is good, conflict around ways of working, ideas, plans, etc. But when it goes into more of a personal realm, that's when you need to step in and to intervene.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that makes sense.
And I suppose that kind of leads us nicely into the next point that I wanted to just spend a few minutes talking about, which is psychological safety. It's a term that you may have heard before. You're not going to have as much conflict on a team that feels psychologically safe for the members of that team. And so what do we mean by that? So there's a great lady called Prof. Amy Edmondson. She's in Harvard Business School. She has a super TED talk on this, and I have a link to it later on in the slides that people can take a look at. But at its very basic level, what Amy is saying is, with psychological safety, it means that teams can be vulnerable with each other. They're safe to take risks without worrying about negative consequences for themselves personally, for their career. So when you have psychological safety, both for the people on your team and for you as the leader of the team, you're much more likely to see behaviours where people are not afraid to speak up. They will raise problems. They'll let you know when something has gone wrong. They will disagree because they know that you've still got their back, and that if you disagree on one point, it doesn't mean that the relationship is shattered, because the relationship is strong. And what you're doing with trying to create a psychologically safe environment is creating just that climate and culture of trust. And I think that that's particularly important at the moment when people are stressed. And we know we're not our best selves when we're stressed. Sometimes we are short-tempered, we're illogical. And I think we need to be able to be that with our colleagues without worrying that they're thinking that, we intended to be particularly abrasive. People generally don't, but when you're under stress, we know that the worst sides of our personality come out. And so what I've included here are just a few supportive leader behaviours. So the sorts of things that you can do to promote that feeling of psychological safety within your team. And the first one, so important in terms of emphasising purpose. So I think it's such a key role for a leader to join the dots for people. Sometimes we get so caught up in the tasks of our role, we forget the big picture. What are we here to do? Why are we here? What is our purpose? And why does that matter? And so, the example I put in here was, a good phrase to use might be around, care of our community and of each other is our critical aim at the moment. It's going to take all of us working at it as a team to really do our work well. But constantly finding opportunities to remind your team what's important and who you're there to serve and the difference that you're making in people's lives. And I have to say, my goodness, the contribution that pharmacists have made in the last couple of months in terms of health and well-being in our communities, continuing to be there when so much of the rest of the infrastructure of our lives has fallen away, has been super. So I would hope that people are really feeling pride in the profession at the moment, and reminding their teams about that, because that's really important right now. The second one here is around framing the work and inviting participation. So what do I mean by that? So setting expectations that, yes, this is an uncertain time and we need to rely on each other, and really encouraging people to speak up. You know, no one person knows how to get through this crisis or what the right thing to do is. We're all figuring it out as we go. And you need that diversity of thought from your team. And you need people to feel that they can speak up and suggest maybe a completely different way of handling a particular issue or problem within the workplace. So, you know, asking lots of open questions. So saying something like, we've never faced something like this before. There's lots of gaps in what we know. And it's okay, you know, for you as the leader not to know, and to role model that. And, you know, and to throw open questions to your team. What are we missing? How might we do this differently? So rather than feeling like you have to have all the answers, you absolutely don't. And you will get more trust from your team if you show them respect. It's very respectful to say to the people who work for you, I want to know what you think. I want to hear your contributions. What are we missing here? What should we be doing differently? And really encourage them to speak up. And the last point to put in there, just around creating this safe environment, is around being really clear on standards. And by that I mean behavioural standards, making sure that everybody understands where the parameters are, and that there needs to be repercussions if there's any violations of that. So, for example, the example here is we always treat each other with dignity and respect, especially when things are tough. So, yes, we can be forgiving if someone's a bit short, or, you know, lashes out, they've had a bad day. Look, we've all done it, and sometimes we take it out to the people we're closest with. I mean, you know, if that's someone who's in your pharmacy and you've worked with them for years, it's easy to snap. But you need to encourage the right behaviours, that people understand they need to apologise if they've done that they will be called out on it if they continue to do it. But you can do that if you've got that trust and that sense of safety within the team.
Rena, can I come in on one thing? And it's actually on the previous, if you could just back up the previous slide. So all of that is really good. There's two things that strike me on this slide, and they almost go against each other. I agree completely with everything that you're saying. The fearless organization, where I see pharmacists being fearless, is where they will really put patient care first. They will be fearless in identifying where there could be risks, in calling that out. Our colleagues in hospital will be fearless in having that team discussion, an interdisciplinary team. The pharmacist in the community will be fearless in calling up the doctor and challenging on certain ways of prescribing. And so I see pharmacists as being quite fearless in that regard. But what I see them sometimes being very different in is they aren't so fearless about their own needs, and that whole idea of psychological safety, it brings up a lot of issues for me. One of the things that was great about COVID, and maybe we'll talk about this later when we think specifically of COVID and the good and the bad of it, is that pharmacists are suddenly getting lunch breaks, which they never got before. And we, for some weird reason, are expecting pharmacists to work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. without a break. And that's not really giving good ground for psychological safety. And I suppose, is there something there around being fearless about your own needs and your own psychological safety as a team leader, rather than, I understand the psychological safety of the team, but how do you manage it for yourself as well as a leader?
I think the very first step is acknowledging that you need it. I think sometimes as leaders, we're very quick to take care of everybody else. It's a bit like being a parent. You take care of the kids and you put yourself down the list. But I think, you need to A, accept that you need that, and B, potentially find other sources of support for yourself as well. I think the safety works both ways. You need to be able to speak freely and candidly with your team, and they equally need to feel they can do the same thing with you. But when you're in a leadership position, there's going to be a couple of things that you really can't talk to the team about. If you're looking at potentially having to downsize or have some redundancies, or things that in time you will need to talk to your team about, but you need to have a safe space in which to do that for yourself. And I suppose that's where your peer support really comes in, and the importance of your network.
Okay. Yeah, and we're all about peer support and network and IIOP, so that ticks my boxes, Katrina.
You need it though. Like they often say, leadership is the loneliest place, because who supports you? Where do you go to? And I think that's why we're seeing such a rise in the coaching profession at the moment. Like there's a loneliness epidemic in work. I think people feel, you know, I think particularly in the kind of LinkedIn type world where we have to always put the best face out, people still struggle, and you have to find support with that and people that you can trust, you know, so you always need to be horizon scanning, I think, for people who can watch your back and be a safe space for you as well as a leader.
Yeah, we might circle around to that idea of what COVID has brought and what good things have come and how we can preserve
I
it.
put a slide in around that because I think it's really important.
Right.
I'm not going to spend long on this next one because I'm keeping an eye on the clock.
But before you do, somebody is writing on the screen. I don't know how you do it. I admire you
It's
every
you.
week. It's not me. No. I don't know who does it, but if you can undo it, it'd be great because it's actually coming up on everybody's screen. So I'm looking at.
Trying to highlight certain points.
No. Somebody out there has more power than I do over Zoom. And you know, the first night it happened, I thought it might be the Russians, but I don't think they're that interested in us.
Could be.
Maybe. So if somebody has noticed that they're writing on the screen by mistake, if you could use your eraser or clear it, because you did clear it another week as well. But anyway, no, that's not me, Katrina. It's somebody is getting fancy with their artwork.
No problem. It won't stop us.
No.
The next one, you know, I suppose was really just, as well as creating that safe kind of climate and environment within your workspace, it's also really important just to think about the core needs of people at work. And I think this is a useful reminder, particularly in the context of motivation and engagement, because a number of people who gave us some of that feedback before tonight's session, these topics came up. I'm worried about, you know, how long I can continue to motivate the team. Will they become disengaged, etc. And so I just wanted to share just this little simple framework. It's called self-determination theory. It's a fancy name that's basically just saying, in terms of motivation and engagement, 3 things to think about as a leader in terms of what people on your team need. So the first one around competence. So really feeling effective at your work. So being allowed to just get on with doing the work that you are able to do, to be able to continue to grow and learn in your role. And I think as a leader, particularly at this time, what you're trying to do is get out of the way in a way. You know, to remove any obstacles to people doing a good job, to get them the resources that they need to do their work, and to really try not to micromanage. And I know that that is a hard one because, again, we know from personality theory that when we're under stress, for many personality types, we will revert to being really, you know, detail oriented, making sure that we have every task planned and managed and on top of everything. But that can come across to your team members as micromanagement. So I would say, be careful not to do that. Autonomy is allied to that. So autonomy and control, I think, is really important at the moment. Feeling that you have some control over your work, your workplace, and that you're not being coerced into anything or directed in terms of being pushed in a way that, or in a direction that you don't want to go, I guess. So recognizing that people have a very strong need for autonomy and control in their workplace. And then the last one is around relatedness and connectedness. So really feeling belonging. You know, when we're under stress, we turn to each other, the other members of our team, as sources of support to help us cope, and particularly now at this time. And so I think that sense of being in it together, and it's a narrative that's out there in the press at the moment, it's important because it's part of what keeps you going. You're doing it for each other as well as for the patients and the customers. So yeah, they're just 3 things to bear in mind in terms of motivation and engagement. And when they're in place, what the research finds is that you're much more likely to have enhanced performance and well-being on your team. And so well-being is a bit of a trigger word for me, because I think, okay, well-being, yes. I mean, you'd have to be living under a stone for the last couple of months to not have heard about how important it is to look after your own well-being, look after the well-being of your teams and your families. But, you know, I always ask the question, well, what is well-being? It just feels a bit woolly to me sometimes. It's different things to different people. So I suppose in the context of what we're talking about here tonight, what I would say as a leader you need to really be focusing on now is prioritizing psychological well-being and emotional well-being. So the mental health of your teams. And I know you're going to do more about this, Katrina, you mentioned in a couple of weeks. So my colleague from our Institute of Leadership, Dr. Mary Collins, I believe, was on with you a couple of weeks ago, and I know that she mentioned the work of Professor Martin Seligman. He's in the University of Pennsylvania, and he's fantastic. He does great work around positive psychology, but he has published extensively over the last 20 years around what does psychological well-being look like. And so he has this model called PERMA, which attempts to break down what psychological well-being looks like. So just to run down through that, the P is around positive emotions. So happiness, you know, feeling positive emotions on a daily basis in your workplace. So gratitude, pride, joy. I know it all sounds a bit fluffy, but it is about thinking about the emotion of the person in the workplace and really looking for everything that's good. And I think as a leader, what you can do is amplify some of that. Try to find the pockets of good practice, or the incident where somebody went out of their way to help a customer or to help a patient, and to really highlight that and put a spotlight on it. So to search for those good things every day and to continue that narrative with your teams. It's a bit like the 3 good things. You begin to train your brain to look for what's good. And you begin to get your teams to do that too, the more that you do it. So the next one is around engagement, and this is about thinking about, when people are really doing good work, they're in what they call a state of flow, and we know that that's when people are using their strengths. So anything that you can do in terms of recognizing the variety of strengths that people on your team have, and thinking about how you can arrange the work that needs to be done in your team to play to those strengths, really important for well-being. The next one is around positive relationships. And again, it's that back to that previous point around connectedness and belonging and the importance of strong, supportive workplace relationships. Meaning, absolutely, ties back into those other models around purpose. We have to constantly remind ourselves and our teams around the value of our work and the meaning. And I think, you have that in spades at the moment. And then accomplishments. So making sure that people have a sense of achievement, that they are thanked for their work, that you recognize the contribution that they're making. And so the PERMA model is really saying if we have all of these aspects in place, you're much more likely to have a resilient team and a team that can cope better with stress. And I have to say, when I asked about the behaviors on your teams and what sort of positive and negative behaviors had surprised you in the last few months, it was incredibly positive and heartwarming to read, how proud I think so many of you are of how your teams have stepped up, how resilient and supportive they have been. Yes, there's been a few incidents here and there, but I was really struck by how surprised you were at how amazing your teams were. And maybe we haven't had a chance to see that or haven't given our people opportunity to step up before now, but circumstances have forced us into it. And I think certainly a lot of you have been pleasantly surprised. I don't know, Katrina, does that tally with the feedback you've been getting informally?
Yeah, it is actually. And it's not just from pharmacists talking about their teams. I've actually often I make a point of trying to talk to teams around pharmacists as well, and so many of the healthcare staff and so many of the technicians been so proud of their pharmacists, so proud of what they're doing together collectively in their communities, and yeah, the feedback that came through was really lovely to see, and I think it's a testament to the commitment that pharmacists have to their teams. What's really interesting, myself and Alicia talked about this, and many of us in the office talk about it, as pharmacists you don't always realize all the skills that you have, you don't always realize your strengths, and I certainly didn't realize that the skill that I had developed in community pharmacy is listening to so many different conversations. So I'd be in the dispensary and you hear something that's on the healthcare counter being said, and if it's not the right information, you don't have much time. Sometimes you have to just go straight over and have an intervention, if you like. And I think where that works really, really well is when you've got good relationships and everybody knows where their limits are and they know what your role is. But if you haven't got that built up, and it's sometimes I feel very
I feel a lot for locums when they walk into a new team and they don't have the opportunity to do all of this, and they need to do some scene setting at the start maybe of the day to help people understand their way of working. So, you know, I think you're right. The sentiments that came through are really, really, really good, to see pharmacists and their teams rising to the occasion. And I think the communities have seen that. I think the health service are seeing it. And I think we're developing a platform of goodwill that we really, really can build on now. And the conversations that I hear, like this morning with the Pharmacy Contingency Planning Group, are that, wow, you know, pharmacists are so crucial here actually, and we need to build on this positivity. So yeah, I think there's a lot in that model alone. That slide in and of itself, if you just spent some time working through that on its own, it would be a really powerful way to approach team development.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Katrina. I'm going to move on to something that I think is really, really important as we begin to emerge from the eye of the storm. So people have been in survival mode, teams have been in survival mode to get through these last number of months. But I get the sense that we're beginning to emerge from the eye of the storm, and I think that it is incredibly important to try and create some time and space for your teams to actually reflect on what has happened, what have we been through, how did we deal with it, the good, the bad, the indifferent, and to give everybody a chance to have some input to that conversation. And so I wanted to share this as just a really simple model that you could use to structure a conversation, to, you know, draw up a 4x4 on a page and let everybody fill in their thoughts, whatever it might be. But what it does is try to help you make sense and break down what has been our crisis response, how have we gotten through this to date, and really what have we learned from it, because this is incredible action learning that we're all living through at the moment. So I might just start at the upper left-hand quadrant there around end. So these are identifying things that the team has had to do to respond to the immediate demand, but they are things that are specific to the crisis period and that we can now stop doing. To the right of that then is amplify. So equally within this period, we've been able to try some new things. We've had to try some new things, new ways of working, new ways of communicating or interacting. And actually we really like them, and they show some signs of promise for the future. And let's think about trying to institutionalize them as new ways of working within our team. And then below the line is around what has stopped. So to really acknowledge, look, we've stopped doing some things and actually they weren't serving us anyway. They were already unfit for purpose. We should have stopped them ages ago, but this has forced us to stop them. And it allows people to just put some words around what that might be. And agree to, okay, we can now say as a team, we're not going to do this anymore, actually. We didn't like it anyway, or we did it and we never really thought about why we did it. But now we see that we've stopped doing it. Why would we start again? And then restart is the other one. So there are certain things that teams have had to stop doing in order to allow them to really deal with the task in hand and focus on the crisis. But they need to start again and they need to get picked up in some form. So some of these things could be really simple, and one that we had discussed was around lunch. I was really shocked. I had never thought about it, that, you know, you have teams who are really on their feet all day, not having a lunch break sometimes. That's really difficult. And I think some of the feedback, I think Alicia, you had mentioned it, that, you know, you had heard from colleagues who loved the fact that the team could sit down and just debrief over lunch and talk about how things were going and really support each other.
Yeah, I suppose it was the fact that this was something newly introduced, and it was a bit of a novelty, and then just realizing that it made such a difference to their energy levels and to be able to continue for the rest of the day. And so I suppose the hope is that this might have continued. I know in some pharmacies it maybe is now gone back to not being possible, but that they did appreciate it when they had it at that time.
And I think all you're trying to do is A, acknowledge and thank the team for everything that they've had to do to get through this period. And B, you know, I would say go last in terms of sharing your views. I always think, you know, when you're trying to really hear what your team think about something, if you go first, nobody wants to openly contradict you. They're more likely to agree with you. So I would always say to, you know, if you're trying to run this sort of a session with your team, even if it's only over lunch, if you want to take them out for a pizza, go last in terms of sharing your views, but really try to hear from everyone, not just the loudest voices. The quieter people on your team as well are often the people who have some really fantastic insights. And I think this just gives a nice, simple kind of model to say, look, let's talk about all that has happened and let's try to make sense of it around what's good, what we had never thought we could do and now we realize we can, and actually what we just don't want to go back to doing now that we've realized we can manage without it. Make sense? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great one for us to actually make sure that this crisis doesn't go to waste, you know, to really make sure that there are some golden silver linings. And I know that that's been done at a policy making level as well. So the idea of health mail, it was brought in and has been fantastic in lots of ways. It's not without its problems, and pharmacists will be well aware that on an ongoing basis there's lots of things that would need to be different. And so that's actually pushing the agenda on e-prescribing really, really hard, because it's been such a positive thing. So I know at a professional level, with a focus on pharmacy, Philip Crowley is really looking at this and going, okay, what does the new practice, what is pharmacy going forward going to look like? And what do we not revert on? And, you know, so there is always an opportunity. I think we had it in one of our really early slides, maybe with the PSPs, Winston Churchill's quote that you just never let a good crisis go to waste, and you make sure that you really amplify that new practice that started that wouldn't otherwise have done. Like these webinars are a pure example. They would never have been on the work plan. They were something that the PSP decided, network decided that they wanted. The response has been really good, so we'll keep doing them. You know, so there's lots of ways like that, and we didn't have to have a big conversation about that. You just kind of follow your gut sometimes with what's working and just go with it. Yeah.
And I suppose without doing this kind of exercise, the risk is that it just peters out. And in a couple of years, people say, that was really good when we used to do that. I wonder why we stopped. So it's really about being more intentional around what do we want to carry forward and what do we want to stop doing. I actually saw a piece in the Times Higher Education website this week, which is a bit of a Bible for anybody in higher education. And it was one of our Appel placements, or one of the pharmacists who's on placement in a community pharmacy down in Cork, I think it was. And she was talking about how, from an RCSI perspective, she's I think fourth year, is that the year they do their placement? Yeah. She no longer has to do a summer research project, and instead she's being asked to create a reflective piece on what has she learned as a healthcare professional on the front line. And it just really struck me. I thought, it's not just students that need to figure that out. It's equally valid for everybody who has worked through this, and something that I'll be encouraging our staff within RCSI to do as well, because I just think it's a really important conversation that needs to happen, and we need to make sure as leaders that we make space for that and that we prioritize it.
Thanks.
So again, just moving on, one word that really bubbled up from the feedback that everybody sent in was around uncertainty. So uncertainty within themselves, uncertainty within their teams. And I suppose I just wanted to say a couple of things about that. The quote there, uncertainty is the spotlight that reveals your leadership. You know, it is a moment in which we're all incredibly uncertain. I don't think in anybody's careers we've had such mass uncertainty across the world, and that is the domain that we now live in and will be in for the foreseeable future. And I think that is causing a lot of discomfort. And, you know, particularly when I think about the pharmacy profession and some of the pharmacists that I would have worked with to date, what has always struck me is how precise and correct, and, you know, the attention to doing things absolutely right is such a core value for you, and wanting to be right and needing to be right from a professional perspective. It's very hard to suddenly try and navigate your way in a world where there is no certainty, there is no right. There, you know, it is very much figuring it out as we go. And I touched on this point earlier, so acknowledging your own and others' emotions. This is an emotional time. I know, you know, a lot of people aren't always comfortable dealing in the language of feelings and emotions, but I think it would be disingenuous of us as leaders not to. And to show that bit of vulnerability. That's absolutely what a lot of the strongest leaders do. Some of you may have seen the work of Brené Brown. She's a sociologist from the University of Texas, I think it is. She talks a lot about the best leaders being the ones who are not afraid to say that they don't know, to show where they're vulnerable, because people begin to see you as more of a human being, as somebody who's fallible just like them. Just because you're a leader doesn't mean you have to know everything. And I think you will get much more respect from people when you say that. The next point then was around questions. So when people feel uncertainty and there's a void, sometimes that comes out, oh my goodness, a cat has just jumped into my living room. Okay, sorry about that. It's not my cat.
Coping with uncertainty. It's not your cat. Oh, shoot.
You know, to not interpret, you know, when people are under stress or they're unsure about something, sometimes a question will come to you as the person in charge or in authority, and it will seem quite hostile because people are anxious. And what I would say is, look, you don't have to have the answer. You don't have to feel that you because you are the person in charge that you need to know. And I think that the best thing that you can do there is just calmly acknowledge that you don't know and commit to sharing when you have more information or when there's more certainty. I think you get more respect for that. And then the last one, I guess, is around having to make decisions about what to do or what to say when you have an absence of information or you need to do something very quickly. I would always say, come back to your values. So when you're uncertain about something, come back to your values to guide your decision making. What is the right thing to do in line with the type of person that I want to be, the type of leader that I want to be, the type of person that I know I am. And, you know, I think in any kind of leadership development, I always focus on trying to raise people's self-awareness, particularly around values, because values are your guiding light when you're not sure, when you're dealing with uncertainty.
Can I ask you something on that, Katrina, please?
Yeah.
And look at, you know, anybody who's on the webinar may feel like I'm a bit of a broken record because I said something similar with Mary, but the thing that the dissonance that I feel with this is when you talk about going back to your values and knowing how to manage it, as pharmacists, we're really trained to remove the uncertainty. You know, we're really tasked with actually making that ambiguous situation and all of that complex drug interactions more certain. And I suppose it's our job to be certain about things and to find and ask questions. So I struggled with this as I became into more leadership roles where I had to navigate uncertainty. And I know everybody does that in their career progression, but I think for pharmacists in particular, the fact that we're trained within an inch of our life to be certain about what we say, and then being asked to lead teams and declare vulnerability and be uncertain and say you're uncertain. I know one's a clinical situation and one's a personal, you know, maybe more people-focused situation, but any tips on how we do that? Because it is a real difficulty in pharmacy that we just make that transition.
I suppose what I would say is you don't have to do a complete 180. You don't have to go from being a person who's certain about everything to suddenly sharing every emotion that you have and declaring that, you know, you're completely unsure. But, you know, you're not going to do that. I would say baby steps, experiment. It's like anything in terms of behavioral change. You have to buy into why you're doing it. Why is this important? Because otherwise you won't bother. You'll just stay as you always were. So I think is understanding, why is this important for the people that I lead, to show them the more human side of me and to have them appreciate that, you know, leadership should be collective, you know, that they are part of creating the type of team that you have, the type of pharmacy that you run. It's not just all down to you. And then I would say little pieces of behavioral experimentation add up to something much more. So you don't need to suddenly show up all singing, all dancing, vulnerable leader, not at all. But I would say, you know, try to experiment with it and find little moments where you can just reveal a bit more of who you are, because people respond to that.
That's actually very useful, because I suppose what I sometimes forget is the journey I took. And you don't read a book and learn this. It's, you see it role modeled, or you see other people, or you try something out, and yeah, now I think
work.
Doesn't always work.
You think, that's not me, I can't do that, or I can't say that, and that's okay. You just try again until you find something that fits better with who you are.
Yeah, and sometimes you can get a bit burnt with declaring your vulnerability. Like, you have to be a bit careful with that as well. So it is very much trial and error. And I think the team, anybody who knows me will know that I'm perfectly happy to declare my uncertainty now. I'm completely revel in uncertainty compared to how I was.
But you've been on that journey since you were new to the workplace.
Yeah, and I had some really great mentors. Mary Rose Burke would have been one of the key people in my development who would have thrown me into situations that she knew I couldn't deal with. I knew I couldn't deal with, and I hated it. And I hated her for doing it to me. But actually, it was one of the best things she ever did, because she was always there to kind of talk it through, and I learned a lot from it. And, you know, the team will know Alicia had a fast track of maybe a day to prepare for how you do webinars, and got thrown into uncertainty and did it brilliantly. So I think, yeah, it's having a little bit of experience. And this is, again, where coming back to peer support and mentors, I think, is just so so crucial. And also, you know, there I've gone declaring I'm completely uncertain as to how somebody is able to write on our screen, and somebody is asking if it's your cat, Katrina, who's clawing on the screen. But Aisling Reese, the fabulous lady who guided us in the beginning, has actually told me exactly how to stop that happening in future. So there is another thing that I've now learned.
Peer support.
Peer support and uncertainty.
You may not know the answer, but someone out in your network does, and
exactly.
you have to them. Yeah,
exactly.
So I'm just keeping an eye on time, because I know you've made a commitment to finish by 9. So 3 takeaways to try and sum all of this stuff that I've thrown at everybody. The first one around what I really believe: no one leader could or should have all the answers at this time, and it's okay to not know, and to just accept that. And so right now, really the most important simple things that you can do are in terms of developing your skill to listen, to really hear what people on your teams are saying. And the most important task is to help people that you lead to do their job, to let them get on with doing their job, and you as the leader provide the resources and remove obstacles and don't get in their way. The second one, you know, team well-being, absolutely, it's a priority, but don't forget that you're part of that team, and consider your own needs too. You set the tone, the team take their lead from you. You can't pour from an empty cup. So look at that PERMA model and think about what you have for your own well-being as well, and what you might need and where the gaps are. And finally, around to this sense-making piece. So really create the space and the time for you and the team to make sense of all that has happened, and try to make sure that you hear all the voices on your team, not just the loudest ones. I really think that that is something that would be really powerful to do. If you were going to invest an hour of time outside of the day job, that's worth doing. More scribbles, I see.
Well, there was loads of ticks there. There were red ticks coming on, so that's fantastic.
So and you'll be getting these slides, but I just included a few links to some tools and resources that I thought people might be interested in. So if you want to hear more about psychological safety, there's Amy Edmondson's TED Talk, which is a really interesting listen. PERMA, there's a nice website where you can do a self-assessment to look at your own well-being under each of the PERMA pillars. There's a site called At My Best, and this is all about the strengths. So an online reflection tool where you or someone on your team or everyone on your team can really begin to sit down and think about, well, what are my strengths? What are the strengths that I bring to my role and to our team? And for you as a leader, it's around building that awareness of your own and your team's strengths, and appreciating that, and the fact that everybody is bringing something different to the team. We talked about happiness. There's an amazing UK organisation called Action for Happiness. Some of you may have seen some of this going around on Twitter. They publish monthly calendars that are very much based on positive psychology and neuroscience around little nudges to help you change your perspective, and little nudges to get you to take small actions on a daily basis to push you in a happier direction. And again, it's about, you know, making some of this stuff visible for your teams. Print out one of these calendars, put it up on the wall. Right now it's Meaningful May, and it's little prompts every day of things that you can do. They have a 10 days of happiness free online coaching course you can sign up for. But, you know, culture, one of the things that we think about in the culture that you're creating in your teams is, well, what do people see? What's visible? What are the artifacts, we call them? And so, you know, if you as a leader are putting up a calendar that says, I want everyone to really work on their happiness, and this month we're focusing on meaning, then that says a lot about you know, what's valued within the team. And then the last one was an article that really resonated with me. Harvard Business Review have some fantastic coronavirus articles, and they've made it all free and open access at the moment, because usually it's all behind a firewall that you have to subscribe. But there's a really good article on how to answer an unanswerable question, and I think we have a lot of them coming our way. When will this all end, etc. And I think that's worth a read if you have time. And then just my last little line to leave you with from Maya Angelou. She's an American poet. She's dead now, but I think this is one of her most famous quotes, and one that I just think is really important for the times that we're in. People will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And you are incredibly powerful as leaders of really important teams at the moment. So don't forget to think about how you're making people feel. That's a lot.
Okay, wow, thank you. And that's a lovely sentiment to end on. But I suppose I just like to say a huge thank you to you, Katrina, because that's been really, really helpful. Sorry, just one second. Really helpful. And you know, that thing about people will remember how you made them feel. I think you've made us feel special tonight. I think you've called out some of the stuff about pharmacy that's good, that we don't hear much, so we'd like to hear it. And you've reminded us that, you know, we're important in leading our team. So thank you for how you've made us feel. I want you to, people who are on the webinar, we've a minute just to think about the reflection. But Alicia, any particular comments that we need to be aware of?
Well, there's a lot of positive comments coming through, just thanking you for the webinar, and a lot of the information they find really, really useful and resonated with a lot of people. Now, there was a few comments about particular things like Myers-Briggs and the DISC behavioral styles. Is that something that you would have used in the past?
Yeah, I think that's something that we're going to have to park a little, because there seemed to be a lot of debate about how valid they were. And I don't think, I think anything that helps you raise your awareness, I think, Katrina, you might agree with me on this, anything that helps you raise your awareness and other people's awareness of how they like to see the world are fine. If they start to categorize people, then the psychological kind of rejection of them is valid. Katrina, any thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, I think MBTI is increasingly getting some bad press, and I would always use any of those tools with a caveat saying this is one way of helping us make sense of how people have different preferences and how they see the world. It's not gospel, but it gives us a way of making sense of other people's behavior, and you know, I use it on that basis, just around awareness raising.
Yeah. There was another question about what you do when there's one particularly toxic person on a team. What I might do, we'll be sending out a review of this and a link to the recording. We might put one or two of the questions and just get your answers on them, Katrina, if that's okay, almost like an FAQ. And we can always follow on. So make sure you let us know. I'm going to wrap it up, Alicia, if that's okay. I know there was probably lots of other things in the comment box, but I do want to let people go. Do reflect on today. Can you have the 3 impacts that Katrina left us with? So remember our 3 takeaways. Really do spend a little bit of time thinking about that. And next week, I really do hope you join us for an interesting webinar about the challenges and surprises of how COVID-19 has impacted people who use drugs. So I spoke to a doctor today who said that 300 heroin addicts have actually, in his practice, moved onto methadone because of the lack of availability of street drugs. We'll have the chair of the clinical lead of the clinical program talking to us about the expected impact of easing restrictions and how that plays out when people have more access to street drugs that they didn't have access to over the last few months. And we'll talk about the impact for patients and pharmacists as well. So really do hope you join me and the team for that. And the one afterwards, I alluded to today, in the beginning of June, we'll be looking at mental health and how we preserve that. So I very much hope that you join us. I do want to say a massive thank you to everybody who's been here with us this evening. It's not easy on a lovely, lovely sunny evening and after a day's work. Well done is on the screen. Thank you to whoever has been entertaining us with the scribbles. You'll be prevented from doing it next week, so go for it now for the last minute. And Katrina, I just most particularly want to say thank you to you. You have been really giving us some great insight, great gems of wisdom in a really practical and digestible way. And we'll be happy to pass on any questions people have for Katrina, or if they want anything more. And when we send out the feedback, I know you're busy. Please try and respond to it, and please try and tell us what you want to hear more of, because we're guided by you. So please make sure to just point us in the right direction, and we'll make sure that we do that. It's so interesting. Every week at 9 o'clock, you have somebody waiting to come into the room, and I just think, oh gosh, you missed it. But I think that's normally what we do, Katrina, is we leave the last word with the presenter. So I'm going to go to you for just a quick goodbye and what you'd say, so you think about that. And for everybody else, we normally leave the cameras on and everything on for about 4
4 or 5 minutes, just the usual kind of finishing up after the end, but feel free to leave. And thank you so much, not only for being here this evening, but for the really wonderful care you give to patients and how well you represent our profession every day. So thank you for that. Katrina, final goodbye from you.
Oh, really just a thank you to the profession. I think certainly my awareness of how much we rely on our pharmacists has increased in the last couple of months. Certainly from a personal perspective, I have 2 kids, and we've really relied on our local pharmacists. So thank you. I think you do amazing work. You've been thrown into something that none of us were prepared for, and have really risen to the occasion. So thanks for keeping your teams going and for contributing to Irish society at a time when we need you. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina, and thank you to every one of you, and have a lovely evening. Now, Katrina, normally what we do is we just let people leave, whoever needs to leave, and then we stay on just for a few minutes if people have particular questions. Brendan, I see you waving. If anybody has a particular question that they want to put on their mic, you can see Evelyn. You can actually, you can raise your hand, but I think that's you saying goodbye. But there's also an opportunity at the bottom in terms of reactions. You can actually raise your hand. I'm just doing it on my screen now. So if you do want me to come to you to ask a question specifically of Katrina, you can do that. But we'll be finishing the recording shortly. Essentially, that is our content for the evening, and you're very welcome to stay for a little while. This is kind of like the virtual way of everybody milling around after a face-to-face meeting, but otherwise, hopefully, we'll see you at a future webinar. Bye, Claire. I see you waving. Okay, Sean, thumbs up. Very good. See you. Hi, Patricia. See you there. See you, Anne. Good luck. Oh, it's just so lovely to see everybody. It's actually, I really look forward to this part of a Wednesday evening where I can see everybody and people are waving. I know it's a bit artificial, but at the same time, it's good. Now, I'm not seeing anybody looking specifically to ask a question, but maybe I'm missing something in the comments box. Am I, Alicia?
No, just a lot of comments saying how thankful they are. So a comment here, it's so refreshing to look at pharmacy from this angle, such a great presentation, very thought-provoking, and some nice positive sentiments to take away from it.
Very good.
And we will be sending out a recording of the webinar and the link to the survey. So I'm sure we'll be able to get a lot of other feedback as well.
Oh, here, somebody else is asking again. So I'm going to put it to you, Katrina. How do you manage the bad apple?
I would say stop thinking of them as the bad apple, for starters.
Okay, that's a good start.
Yeah, but it's going to influence how you engage with them. You're already in a very negative mindset in terms of your engagement with them, and that's not going to improve anything. So, I think you have to look at it more as, here's a person on my team who's not happy, who's creating problems, and I need to try and understand what's going on here and create an opportunity to really listen. And make them aware of the impact of their behavior on the rest of the team. Like, I'm sometimes surprised by the lack of self-awareness that some people have. They're very much in their own world. They're thinking about their own needs, and they forget sometimes the ripple effect from their behavior and what it's doing to the rest of the team. So I would try and find some way of raising their awareness around that, and try to engage with them on a very human level around, what is going on here. They may not even know themselves sometimes. The issue could be something outside of work that's manifesting in work. I think it's that phrase, seek first to understand, where the behavior is coming from.
Katrina, just to bring it to the real nuts and bolts of this, how do you even start that conversation?
I think it takes a bit of bravery, particularly if it's been going on for years and you have, by doing nothing about it, you have in a way condoned it and allowed it to happen, and you have to take a certain amount of responsibility for that as well. And I think you have to own that. I think you need to find a private time and space to ask that person's permission to sit down and have an honest conversation with them, and to flag it with them, but not to approach it from a disciplinary perspective to start with. It's an exploratory perspective around, help me understand what might be going on here.
So that would be a bit different to one person's advice, which is, what you do with the bad apple, eat it. We don't eat it.
I see someone here mentioning, you know, do a 360. 360s are great, you know, if they're handled well. So I like to use 360s in terms of development. So where, you know, I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with them, but where you send a set of questions to people's peers, to the people who work for them, to the people who they work for. So it's a holistic view of the impact that individual is having on others. And sometimes that data can be really powerful. The qualitative comments in particular around real examples of incidents where people have maybe been hurt by a comment that has been made, or, you know, where trust has been broken. And it really brings it to life for the individual, and it gives some weight to your perspective. Isn't just you have a problem with them, it's collectively sourcing that.
Okay.
And it has some weight to it then. Like, people are more likely to accept it if, you know, I always say in a 360, don't worry about the specific comments that somebody's making, but if there's a theme bubbling up, there's something there. Whether you agree with it or not, it's how other people are experiencing you, and that's important.
I would say that when I was working in community pharmacy, particularly in smaller teams and smaller pharmacies, 360 isn't something I'd necessarily heard anything about. Now, I have found them hugely beneficial in my own development. So it might be a topic for another. Some people may not even be familiar with the concept. So it might be something that we do in another session. But really, the prevailing sentiment here, Katrina, is that it has been incredibly useful, really inspiring, really good listen, and somebody has just said a magnificent webinar. So well done. Thank you so much.
That's great.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just don't know, will this resonate with people? Am I talking about the things that, you know, make a difference? And I try to just keep it real. You know, we're all just people, no matter how senior you are and no matter how junior the most junior person is, we're all just people trying to do a job that we care about.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, look, let's leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time for this evening. Really appreciate it. And, you know, I think we'd like to hear more from you perhaps. But thanks for your time this evening.
Okay. Thank you, Katrina. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. I'm going to stop us there. Okay. Have a lovely evening, and thanks for joining us.